Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us here this evening. My name is Crystal Dillard. I am a candidate for state representative for District 131 here in Houston. And thank you for joining me again on my Schoolhouse to the State House podcast. This is our fourth episode. And just like we do on every episode, we try to touch a little bit on something that is going to be affecting um, the people of Houston, the people of District 131, and people all over Texas. And today, what we're going to be talking about are voting rights and the new voting regulations that just passed here in Texas. And I'm excited because I have three a really interesting guest here today, and they're going to shed a little bit of light on how voting rights have really affected different types of demographics in Texas and different communities. So I'm going to start to my right. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, my name is Dwayne Charleston from Prairie View, Texas. I'm a former justice of the peace, and I like to consider myself first and foremost a goat farmer, and then an activist, and love working with Crystal and all things political.
Okay, and we're going to start on the end with Miss Lakedra.
My name is Lakedra Blaylock, and I am the executive director of Breaking Chains, Making Amends, which is a nonprofit that serves justice impacted individuals and their families. We provide scholarships to the children and grandchildren of incarcerated individuals, as well as reentry services and mentorship.
Okay.
My name is Kyle Matthews. I'm the owner and CEO of the K Matthews Group, and we seek to educate the general public on financial education and wealth building.
Okay, very good. So we've got a really good mix, a good demographic of a mix of demographic of people that we're going to be talking to, and jumping right in about voting regulations and voting rights in Texas. And what better person to turn it to first than activist Dwayne Charleston. Dwayne, I have known you for many, many years. I don't care to say how many. However, you have always been right there in the forefront of making sure that people were not overlooked and that people's voices were heard. So tell me a little bit about your take on some of the new voting regulations here in Texas and how you think it's going to affect different communities, especially underserved communities and perhaps communities that have been disenfranchised.
Well, I hadn't followed. I followed redistricting quite a bit, so I'm not sure if you're referring to redistricting. But I was reading where they were talking about that it's a colorblind redistricting map, and because now it's really based on partisan views, and so when you find Republicans in power or Democrats in the power, one of the things they're going to do is they're going to draw that stuff to protect their own interests. They're not even drawing it to protect their own political parties.
Mm-hmm.
They are drawing it to protect their own political interests
Okay.
as individuals and stuff. And so what you're going to find out is the more power they have, that they have incrementally more power when they get to drawing these maps and drawing people in and out of districts and things like that. There's only one thing that we can do. And, my take on it is, because there's so much fine print in everything and every piece of legislation. There's only one thing that we can do. Literally, there's only one thing we can do, and that is get our people out to vote.
Absolutely.
Get our people out to vote. We got to push them, pull them, drag them. We've got to get them out to vote. People don't really understand how important who's in Austin is until their son or their daughter is caught up into the system, or until their taxes have been raised throughout the roof, or until they've been drawn into a different district, or until several districts have been imposed on them, water districts and taxing districts and things like that. When you start seeing all this stuff impacting, that's when you realize, wow, that little session that they had about redistricting and about voting rights and stuff like that.
It really mattered.
It really matters.
Yeah.
It impacts. And the DA that we have that got elected as a result of some redrawing,
Right.
or the mayor that we have, the state representative, it all comes down to one thing, that if we value this thing in America that we call democracy,
Right.
if we're going to participate in this thing in America that we call democracy, we must vote. Now, it's okay if people don't want to participate, if they don't want to go and vote. I mean, that's your own deal. But if you don't want to go vote,
You can't complain.
you can't complain. But why would you live in a place that is based on democracy and based on voting? you literally will complain to the day you die. So if you're going to be a part of this system in this society, might as well get involved, and we might as well go ahead and vote. And no matter what the writing on the wall is, no matter what the fine print is on the legislation, everything comes down to us galvanizing our population to go and vote.
Absolutely. And I'm going to turn that to Kyle. Kyle, let me ask you, you have a little bit of a different take on it. You aren't necessarily, you're the entrepreneur, the business aspect. What implications do you feel that some of the new regulations have on the business community?
Taxation. What a lot of people don't realize is when Democrats come in or when Republicans come in, the tax code is going to change.
Right.
Now, historically, maybe in the last 60 years, supposedly when conservatives come into office, there's tax cuts.
Okay.
There's tax cuts across the board for the business class, and there's tax cuts across the board for the residential class.
Right.
However, it's not properly explained. See, the general public hears tax cut. Oh, I'm with that.
Right.
Or the general public hears we're raising the taxes, but no one asks why.
Right.
You see, so when you go to your bank, ask for a loan, but you forgot that you voted for such and such,
right,
you can't get that loan.
Right.
You see, and when people are restricted, and there's many levels to the restriction that people encounter, but it's not properly explained. So as activists, we have to get into the communities and explain to people why you need a proper identification. See, sometimes it's in the branding. You need ID. Well, do we need a driver's license? Do we need a state ID? Do we need a federal ID?
Right. Or one of each or either. And if you don't know those little fine details, you may not, have all the information. And that's what it's about, having all the information to go forward and to be able to have your voice heard. Lakedra, your organization speaks for those who many times are unable to speak for themselves.
Absolutely.
How do you think that these new regulations will affect those who may have been formerly incarcerated and are trying to regain those voting rights, or maybe those who are getting ready to be released or have their rights restored? How do the new regulations affect them?
I think one of the things that is really important is that we make sure, one of the things that we try to do with BCMA is make sure that they are aware of what their rights are prior to them even being released. Because a lot of times once they get out, they don't even want to hear about voting. They don't want to.
Why is that?
Because all they want to think about, I need to get a job so I can pay my parole fees, so I can take care of my families. And they don't really understand how important understanding the intricate details of voting really affects them. They don't really understand that. They think, oh, well, I didn't get a fair trial. And so they take it all of that in and everything from their past, and they're bringing it out when they are released.
Right.
And so, but they don't, their families nor the person that's been incarcerated, they don't understand that. They, like he said, you got to get out and vote. When you don't get out and exercise your right to vote, when you don't get out and get the information you need, you are actually pushing your back up against the wall.
Absolutely.
And so your voice won't be heard. And if you don't have somebody advocating for you and trying to inform them, then they're going to end up probably back in the same position they were in. So I think it will affect them, but they have to get out and vote, get the information, and then apply the information. A lot of people always say knowledge is power, but applied knowledge is power. Applied knowledge is power.
Absolutely. And this is something that I really want to touch on because Dwayne especially has a really good background and some back knowledge for this. But these new regulations and affecting younger people who are coming along, we know that a huge impact can be made with just the seniors coming out of high school who are not registered yet. And Dwayne, you have a little bit of knowledge, in-depth knowledge about the importance of rallying young people to get out to vote. Tell us a little bit about your background back as far as 2005 with that.
Yeah, well, when I first ran for office, it was in 2001 down in Waller County, and they had never had an African-American serve as a local judge, justice of the peace. And I remember when I first began to run, The woman there was a white woman. She had been there for 16 years. She had won 3 consecutive terms, and I chose not to even campaign off the campus. I didn't go to churches. I didn't go to any events. I didn't do anything. I started off just going into the classrooms at Prairie View and basically saying, if only the students at Prairie View would just vote, they could be the first. They could be the first time that a black man has walked into any courtroom in Waller County and somebody said, "All rise," and everybody had to stand up. And I remember saying that over and over and over again until people began to believe, students began to believe and understand that I didn't have to go and campaign to try to get moderates or progressives. I didn't have to go and try to get Democrats or Republicans to switch over. I didn't have to do all of that. People need to understand there's power in common demographics. There's power in common groups. And if you can coalesce that power, if you can bring that power together, and not only bring it together, but make people believe. I remember when Barack Obama was running, and I'm gonna go back, but I remember when he was running, and he used to always say, people just need to see that I could win. And once he won 1 or 2, all of a sudden they were like, he can do this. And so one of the things you have to do is you have to just convince Prairie View students that they could actually make that difference. They could do that because they had never done anything like that before I had come in, and everything else had been a matter of a gentleman's agreement. So one of the things that you have to do is they have to understand what the laws are with respect to residency, who can vote, whether or not, because you had a lot of students thinking they could be registered in Houston, but because they were living in Prairie View, they could vote. No, you can vote one place, one time. You don't have to have a lease. You don't have to have anything, but you can't put that you live at a P.O. box. There were so many different things that we were losing.
That people don't know.
We were losing hundreds of students because where it said residence, you put P.O. box because they don't deliver mail in Prairie View. So people in Prairie View they were used to putting P.O. box wherever it said residence, but that did not work for voter registration. So then we had people who were still registered back in the old county. And when they would register in Waller County, they weren't automatically kicking them out from Harris County or Barrett County or Dallas County. So you had so many rules and regulations that were causing us to have to keep being very duplicitous in actual voter registration. All the while knowing that 19 students had been indicted for falsely voting and registering to vote in 1991 because of lack of knowledge and procedures and policies. And so it's not just a matter of getting everybody registered to vote, but when you start talking about 19-year-olds and 18-year-olds and even 17-year-olds that are going to be 18 on election day, man, it's an educational process. It's not just a motivating process. It's an educational process, because if you're an activist and you're out there, you're constantly wondering, man, if somebody gets indicted for this thing, I don't have the money to bail them out. And that's where we're going. That's where we're headed. Even in 2021, we're headed to the point as they tighten these voting laws. They want some Crystal Mason, my good friend Crystal Mason, who was who accidentally voted. They told her she could vote. Girl went back and served 3 years in prison for what they call illegally voting, even though she had never been told by anybody that she couldn't vote. She thought that she was off of parole, off of probation. But there was still some loose ends that need to be tied in. So the point is, we have to. There's a new generation, not just blacks, whites, Hispanics, but there's a new generation of people that if we're going to be successful in protecting this thing called democracy, there has to be a significant educational process so we can get through all the red tape about what it takes to go out and vote. Because once somebody has a negative experience and they show up and they don't have their ID, or they show up and they say you're not registered, they may never come back. They ain't got time for it.
Well, it's interesting that you said that, and I'm going to go to Lakedra for just a minute, simply because, Lakedra, can you speak to just that particular situation? What are the guidelines for when someone who maybe has been incarcerated, who has been on parole, once they are off of parole, what are the guidelines for them being at that point able to go and get their voting rights restored?
One of the things that I always tell people, go back to the court where you were sentenced to make sure that your full sentence is completed.
Good advice.
Go back there and make sure, because you thinking, oh, I've paid all my fees, I'm off of parole, I can go and register to vote, and your full sentence may not be complete. And so I tell them, go back to the court, then call the voter. There's a number where you can call. I think it's 1-866-OUR-VOTE to make sure that you know what you're
eligible.
If you're eligible to vote, because a lot of times people think that they can vote just because they're off of parole, but you've ended your parole sentence, but you may still have fees that are due. So you still are what they consider a ward of the state of Texas.
Right.
And so make sure to contact the court, contact your parole officer. I tell people, get it documented. If you take the extra step, go to that court, go to your parole officer, get the necessary paperwork to make sure that you're eligible to vote. Because if you have not fully completed that sentence and you go and you vote, you've committed a felony and now you're facing prison time.
That's right.
And a lot of people just do not know that. And it's for the lack of knowledge. And nobody takes the time to explain it to them at all.
And it seems like what we're moving towards, for better or for worse, is a situation where we're going to have to find out this information on our own. It's not necessarily going to be volunteered to us. Mm-hmm. So I have a list here that I think that people really need to be aware of. And this is something that I pulled down from a local news outlet. Mm-hmm. These are seven of the new voting regulations in Texas that people need to be aware of. First one, there's a ban on 24-hour voting. So if you are a person who works shifts, if you are a person who may work overnight, what you're going to have to do to make sure that you are able to vote is to perhaps, if the next election is in March, schedule a day off. Yes. Schedule a day off and do it a month in advance, 2 months in advance. You have time to do that now to make sure that you're not up against a situation where it's election day, that Tuesday, and you can't get the time off, so your voice just won't be heard. That is something that is upcoming. Bans on 24-hour voting. We were able to do that during COVID, and many special provisions were made, but those aren't necessarily going to be followed through on. So that's a ban against that now. So we'll have to make sure that we're proactive. Absolutely. And making sure that we are able to voice our opinion and have our voices heard. But that's a step that we're going to have to take. We're going to have to be proactive in doing that. No one is going to say, do you want this day off? Okay. Also, no drive-through voting. That was another special provision that came through during the COVID era. And that's not going to be the case anymore. We're going to have to go back where it's, walk up polling places. Let's make sure that we budget in that amount of time, whatever it takes, if we need to get the day off. Now, last year with the school districts, many of the school districts gave their teachers the day off to vote, which was great, because if you had to stand in a line that was a very lengthy line, you were able to do that. And this year, and I'm throwing this out there, this year, we've got a lot of 17-year-olds who are turning 18, and they'll be eligible to vote. So make sure that you're registered in time and that you got that day out of school, if the districts give it again, where you actually have time to go and vote. Something else, new vote by mail ID mandates. Okay. Now, this is something that really applies to a lot of people. I'm just going to read this here. It says Texans who are voting by mail, those who are over age 65, out of the county on election day, or have a disability or illness that prevents them from voting in person, are eligible. Will now need to provide either their driver's license number or the last 4 digits of their social security number twice. Once on their absentee ballot application forms and once on the envelope in which they return their ballots. So little details like that can make a huge difference. But the reason that I'm bringing these things out is because if we know that 3 months out right now, there's no excuse for whatever obstacle that you feel may be placed in your way. And there are going to be some obstacles for some people. But if you know that ahead of time, you can't let something deter you from doing what is your right to do. Something else. There's bans on bans officials from mailing unsolicited mail-in ballot applications. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me say this to you. If you want to request a mail-in ballot, it's your right to have it, but you must request it. You must request it. And you must request it with enough time out to be able to receive it and have that ballot submitted by the time before the deadline to have it submitted, or else your ballot will go in file 13 somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay. This is something that there's been a lot of talk about. Poll watchers are empowered. So it is going to be okay for your poll watchers to come and watch from a reasonable distance. What that reasonable distance is, I suggest that you go and pull up this list too, so you know exactly what's going on. But poll watchers can be there watching what's going on in the poll. I'm not saying that it's good or bad, but I will say this: it's good for every polling place. So if there are poll watchers from one party that can go in and watch, then poll watchers from another party can go in and watch at those other polling places. So that is something that is that, let's not let that make anyone nervous, because what is correct for one has got to be correct on the other hand, and it's got to be fair across the board for poll watchers to go in. Now, these poll watchers will be trained, okay? And if that that is something that people want to be aware of, if you feel that you want to be a poll watcher and you want the training, by all means, get out there and get trained. You want to make sure everybody wants to make sure that the elections are free and fair. That's important for everybody. And the requirements for assisting voters. You may have a voter who is disabled, or there may be a voter who is not able to who's not able to see or hear, and those people need assistance in the voting booth. There are going to be provisions for that in these requirements, these provisions that advocates said are barriers to voting. Those who assist people with disabilities, other than those voters' caregivers. So I'm gonna say this: if you have a caregiver who is your normal caregiver, that is probably going to be the best person to accompany you to the poll. Okay. And not maybe have to have someone that you don't know, or someone that you're unfamiliar with, because they're basically going to be able to understand you the best and be able to make sure that your voice is heard in the manner that you want it to be heard. Last but not least, there will be monthly voter roll checks. So, ladies and gentlemen, please hear this very well. If you are not voting consistently, there's a chance that your name may be struck from the voting records, and you'll have to go back and re-register to vote. So the Texas Secretary of State's office will be required to check monthly to make sure no one is on the state's voter rolls who said they were not a citizen when obtaining or renewing their driver's license or ID card. Watch what you're doing when you're going to get your driver's license renewed and those kinds of things. If there is fine print, read that fine print. Make sure, if you're a citizen, that you are indicating that, so that you won't be just erroneously struck from the voting records and not even know it. I would even suggest this, and Dwayne, you can speak to this, and my other experts can speak to this. What would you say? Would you suggest that people right now, even though our next election may not be until March, go and check the status of their voting credentials right now?
Well, you can go to, I think it's the Secretary of State's website.
Right. Yes.
And it's really quick. If you can log in, type in your name, and it'll tell you where you registered and give you all the information. So yeah, if you go to the website right now, and if you type in your name and something doesn't come up, then that's because there's a problem. Maybe you've been taken out off the rolls, or maybe you've moved or whatever. I don't know. But we need to popularize that website and that service, and it's on you can get it on your phone. We were doing a lot of times when we do voter registration, people say, yeah, I'm registered, and we just pull up that name in there and see. Oh, I'm going to say Negro, you hear me? But I was like, you pull up that name and we say, you're not registered, and they say, oh, well, I thought I was. But it's very quick. But we need to get very, very quick with that particular website, and maybe that's the best way to go about it. And of course, we all need to know what those forms of IDs are right now, so that even before we do anything, everybody needs to have some form of ID that's legitimate and not expired.
Right. And when you're working, Kyle, let me turn this to you. When you're working, with your clients and speaking to them regarding business, how important does the rights like voting rights ever surface, or do you think that people are one-sided when it comes to moving ahead in their professional life, and sometimes the issue of voting or being responsible politically never even comes into the equation? Because the reason I'm saying that is because so many times when things are going great for people, many people don't even think about it. What do you see out there?
People don't necessarily pay close attention until the problem lands at their feet.
Mm-hmm.
So when a certain policy comes out of left field,
yes,
now it's a problem. Oh, I didn't vote, I'm not registered, things like that. And as you were reading off the list, I was just categorizing one by one.
Right.
These are just policies of inconvenience.
That's all. Yes, they are. They are.
And it's like wherever you like to shop, if you're inconvenienced, you're more than likely not to go there anymore.
That's right.
If I inconvenience my customers, they're not going to come back to me.
That's right.
So if we put enough impediments in place where it's the law, but at the surface level, it's just a distraction.
That's right.
And people can get sidetracked.
Right.
So maybe a good tack would be, we won't focus on the distraction,
right,
which is this. Let's focus on what we need to do to carry on and go forward.
Exactly. And that's a big point, that whenever I have this conversation, and I have this conversation a lot with my campaign manager, and she's over here somewhere, but we have this conversation a lot. And this is what I said when we first got this laundry list of new regulations that were going to be in place. And one of them was, that I heard and people were really up in arms about, was a identification when you go to vote, identification being asked for. And I was going, well, that's interesting, because I've always been asked when I went to vote for my ID. They don't necessarily ask me for the little pink card, but they say, can I see your driver's license? And they just match that up very carefully with what's on their roll, and they send me on. And that is true for whoever is in line behind me all the way through. It's not certain people they're asking across the board. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I want to know that who's coming in there. I don't want someone else to come in there and say, I'm Crystal Dillard, and it's actually not me. And then we got an actual problem. I want to be matched up with what is correct. But like Kyle said, and Dwayne, you can speak to this too, everything on here is basically a matter of inconvenience. There is nothing on here that should preclude anyone from getting out there who wants to get out there from voting.
And you're right. I mean, the whole thing, they know the science of it is you have low turnout favors one particular party, a large turnout. So even though you make these regulations and it's going to affect everybody across the board, no matter what color, ethnicity, and all that stuff, the low turnout is going to favor one party over the other. And so they've hired scientists to do this kind of stuff, and they know that by one regulation could affect 0.9% of the vote, and they know they've got to affect 3.7% of the vote. They spend time and science behind this whole deal. And you're right, brother. What we have to do is not focus on the impediments, not focus on the distractions. We need to focus on what we must do in order to turn out our people to vote. But at the same time, we cannot discount stuff like, you need hunting license. You can go and vote with a hunting license, a gun permit, or hunting license, but you can't go with a student ID that's issued by the state of Texas. You can get a gun permit from the state of Texas with a picture, and a student ID from the state of Texas, but student ID is not valid and a gun permit is. Students don't have the right to take off a class without being penalized for leaving school, but you can leave your job without being penalized, as opposed to not being penalized. So there are some things that we can't just overlook that we do need to address, but probably don't need to be addressing those in the heat of an election. We need to be addressing those when it's time to have these committee meetings down in Austin. But nevertheless, when we do get back in positions of power and authority, we need to spend our time making sure we erase some of those impediments to voting.
And let's turn the page a little bit and talk about what really is going to be one of the only things that is able to give a fresh perspective to politics in all over our country right now, and that is really getting to the younger people, the people who are now in high school, those people who are now in college, those people who are going to be the decision makers and the policy makers going forward. What is going to be, let me ask you this, Dwayne, because you are the one who actually, and you got a little bit sidetracked when a little bit earlier, you led the march of students for voting rights down in Waller County. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, you know, with young people, I'm not going to say just students or young people, maybe people, period. People don't vote necessarily out of their love for something. They vote because of their anger, because they're upset, because they've been denied something, a right. And that sometimes has to be the motivating factor. But we can't live on that. We can't. We can ride that only so far. And we finally have to get to the point of political maturity where we go to vote regardless, because it's our responsibility. But in Purview, you know, as with students all over the place, the bottom line is they need to understand that the future of our democracy, the future of our counties, the future of our cities, it largely depends on a very growing electorate. And what's going to happen, say, at places like Purview, before African-American students that come out of Purview and Texas Southern, you know, we've been trying for years and years and years to galvanize this young base. If many of our people in African-American community don't wake up, we will be overthrown by an immigrant population, a Latino population, in terms of who's the next on the pole to really command the power of politics. And so we need to be in the process of forming or teaching. When we teach Purview students, we need to teach them how to form alliances with other people. We need to teach them things that will motivate them to stay in the process. It's about motivating them to get in the process and staying in it.
Absolutely. And we can say this, the fact of the matter is that that this country is becoming more and more diverse every day. And it's going to be a situation where we're going to have to figure out how to share that power.
That's right.
Okay. And how to equip everyone with going forward and assuming the power that they should rightfully be able to have.
That's right.
But how do we get our young people? How do we get our young people to understand that nothing is going to happen overnight? Because I go to vote in the next election, that if it doesn't happen the way that I want it to on that day, I'm not going to go back and vote anymore. That's the attitude, because, you know, we've got a lot of young people who are in, you know, who were just brought up for instant gratification. And, you know, that's what it is on television. That's what it is on games. It's instant gratification. And it's a process. Democracy is a process, and changing ideas, changing thoughts, changing laws, that is a process. What do you all think that we need to do and start doing with our younger people of every ethnicity to be in the process for the long run? What can we do differently?
I think one of the things is just, as everybody stated before, just to continue to educate them, but start at an early age. I think a lot of times, because my boys have seen me advocate for others for so long and for so many years, that's a part of who they are. And that's what they see, and that's what they know. And they think,
what are their ages?
Now Bryson is 15 and 19. So,
wow.
So since they were like 4 and 5, they've seen me always advocating for other people. So that's a part of who they are. And now they know how important that is. So just continuously I've been an example, but also just telling them about how important it is to get out and vote. You take the elephant, you bite it one piece at a time.
That's right.
It's not going to change overnight. It didn't take place overnight.
That's right.
But if you can be consistent and you work at it, the change will take place. But if you stop, nothing is going to happen.
Right.
And so just letting them know that there is a process to everything, and just starting at an early age, I think is really important, because they are looking for instant gratification, and we have to change that narrative. We have to.
Yes. Thoughts, Kyle?
Yes. Personally, I think from a young age, we have to teach our young people how to vote. And we can use our last 2 presidents for examples.
Yes.
You know, for lack of a better term, they were both quote unquote rock stars.
Okay.
So people are going to gravitate that.
Right. Right.
So even if you go back to the 1980s with Ronald Reagan, giant majority of people recognized who Ronald Reagan was because I watched him in Westerns.
Exactly. Exactly.
So now, instead of looking into policies, what will this individual do for me if voted into office?
Exactly.
I'm just going to go out and vote for this because he or she is popular.
Right.
And we've seen where that goes.
Yes.
Because when this person gets in office, we forgot to look at the agenda.
Right.
We have to teach people how to identify, and whether or not, even if that's your political party, am I voting for my best interest?
Right.
Am I voting for my family's best interest?
Right.
Because a lot of people accidentally don't vote in their best interest, especially with their pocketbooks.
Right.
So at an early age, our children know their favorite athlete's salary. Yes. They know their favorite actors, all their roles.
Net worth.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So if we can add these elements to what they know, because this is useful information, that's useless information when we're pocket watching, for the lack of a better term.
Yes.
So education, how to vote, why you're voting, and just follow the agenda. If the agenda doesn't match what your morals and beliefs are, don't vote for that individual.
Right.
Because no one's telling you who to vote for, just how.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And the thing about it too is, so many times I think we are all so tied in to having to feel an allegiance to a party. Yes. That's just the way it is. With me being a history teacher, I got to teach about that stuff all the time. And having to have allegiance to a party, and when sometimes some of those ideas or some of the tactics of that party may not be really what people believe in their heart, but they feel like they have to have an allegiance to that party. But that's why it's so important, like Kyle, like you said, that's why it's so important, like you said, Lakedra, and you, Dwayne, that study what people's values are, study what people's agendas are, study what they've done in the past. Mm-hmm. Does the person that I'm voting for actually have any experience in making decisions like this? And if they don't, are they making sure that they have people at their side that they can count on to help them make these decisions that are going to be so impactful to people's lives? Absolutely. Dwayne, let's kind of roll the clock back a little bit. And I know that you are a native Texan. Mm-hmm. And Lakedra, are you a native Texan?
Yes, ma'am.
Kyle, are you a native Texan?
I was born in Michigan.
Oh, okay. But you got here as fast as you could, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, let me say this, Dwayne, and I know that you're passionate about this. Let me ask you this question. Historically, have Texans of color been impacted by voting laws, historic voting laws, for instance, Jim Crow, to the present? Do you think that voting laws have impacted Texans of color in a way that is not necessarily fair across the board? What are your thoughts?
Well, up until probably the early 50s, we weren't even in the equation. Mm-hmm. with respect to voting laws because of the threat mm-hmm. of so much violence in the event that we went to vote. I remember I asked my father about the poll tax back in, I guess it was 30s, 40s. And I was asking him about the poll tax, and he remembered getting a poll tax. And I said, How could y'all afford to pay? It was like,
Right.
$10, $15.
That was
He
a
said,
lot back then.
he said, we just didn't go vote. And he
Right.
made a
Wow.
point that nobody voted because nobody could afford to pay a poll tax. And that has to be something that was seared in his memory. He's 93 years old,
Wow.
and that's seared in his memory. So maybe that's why our older people are much more likely to go and vote,
Yes.
because they knew that it used to be something that was an expensive undertaking, and they fought and endured and had people dredged out of rivers uh, because people trying to have that attempt to vote. So this whole impact of voting for Texans is not just different. It's just not different and unique to Texas.
Right.
It's obviously throughout the South, and it was a much more brutal,
Right.
much more threatening thing to try to go and vote. Or if you were going to be an organizer or a pastor who was going to be
Right.
promoting that, you risk having your church burned down, or you certainly couldn't get jobs. But I'd submit to you that not much has changed from those particular days, because you do have a certain number of people in the religious community that don't want to cross the line and get involved. There's some people, many African Americans, who realize as long as I keep my nose clean and don't identify with who I am, my job prospects are going to be better. As long as my Facebook page and my social media post, my resume doesn't show certain associations, I can benefit. And we're all at the same time pretending like I'm woke, but knowing very well that if I go this straight and narrow, I will have an edge over your typical other African American, Latino, or white brother for that matter. Um, and so these rules have not really changed. The policies not really changed. Maybe you couldn't live in a certain neighborhood years ago. Maybe you couldn't vote in the primary system years ago, but it hadn't changed. Now they've just made it more difficult through all of these rules and regulations that are meant to discourage and stuff. And so you still probably see that the percentage of people who are voting has not appreciably changed over the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years. You're still stuck at 25, 30% of people who have voted because of so many different reasons and things. They're not as violent.
Until recently.
That's right.
Until recently.
Well, you have Barack Obama that got up above, 55, 60%.
Until this last election, more people voted.
How many people you think voted this past Tuesday? I bet we didn't get 6%.
Well, but that's different. Sometimes
and those things were on the ballot were every bit as important as a general election. If you look at that stuff, you're talking about 5 or 6%. We've got to get the political maturation where we go to vote regardless.
Absolutely.
And so you can't just say, well, we had 60% in 2008 and 2012. You got to average this whole thing. And once you average it all out, it's going to be, I mean, when Kennedy ran, it was a huge turnout then. But what I'm saying, ultimately, we're at about 26, 27%. And it's not because of lynchings, and it's not because of that. It's because of impediments to voting.
Okay, and impediments to voting, meaning like different types of regulations that have been put on the books.
Right.
However, what we're talking about now, and what we are prepping to do right now, is to resolve the restrictions, and by being proactive in doing things and making sure that we can, as Kyle said, get one by one. What do we need to do to be proactive so that these are not barriers?
Well, the first thing we need to do, it ought to be same-day voter registration. Same-day voter registration. We ought to be able to vote over the internet. We ought to be able to do everything that we're doing on Zoom, all of this technology.
But how can you effectively vet who is voting if you do same-day registration? Do you think that there is a greater chance to have mistakes?
The same way you can go in and buy a car on the same day, and they trust that you're not going to drive that car out and kill somebody. There's technology allows us to do so many things in the same day. You mean to tell me somebody can't come in with a driver's license and they can't put it in a computer system if we're willing to invest in that technology for our voting systems, that they can't take a driver's license, swipe it, and say, this guy's not registered anywhere else. This guy is not a convicted felon. This guy is not, this guy, that's simple.
But the thing
is, really simple.
Yeah.
But we have to have the will and the fight to go with same-day registration, and it ain't even on the radar for some people.
That's a nice wish list.
It's not a nice wish list. It's fundamental.
But
it's fundamental. It should be fundamental.
It should be, and that's the thing. But right now, it's a wish list. So if that doesn't happen, Kyle, Lakedra, if that doesn't happen, what are the things that we need to do to still be able to be effective and not miss our chance at the poll going forward?
My mother and father taught me that when certain impediments are put in your place, beat them at their own game.
Yes.
If they put these rules in place, use them against them. If they put, you have 2 pages right here,
3 pages,
3 pages of policies for voting.
Right.
Okay, so now identify it. Here's the solution. Get the solution out to as many people as possible.
Right.
What he said
early.
Yeah, we can't wait till October of next year for a November election to get the word out.
Yes.
So what he said was correct. The technology is there. Do the powers that be want the technology to be implemented? So as long as we have to abide by this, it's the law.
Right.
Okay, so now going forward, get the word out to the general public.
Right.
We have to go through these 3 pages.
Yes.
If you want
one
things
by
to
one,
change,
one by one,
right?
That's
One
right.
by one. If you want these things to change, we're going to do it this way.
Yes.
And if we beat them like this, just keep in mind they're going to move for football people. They're
ball.
going to move the goalpost again
Yes.
in the middle of the game. We have to be able to be reactive instead of always being in a proactive mode. You see,
right.
And this is the perfect time to be reactive to this because now it's here. There's lawsuits in the courts, so we can move forward.
Right.
But we have to use their own rules against them.
Okay.
I agree. I think one of the things that we've been doing with people that are formerly incarcerated is just educating them, going out to the different organizations that service the population and letting them know that they can vote, helping them register to vote.
Right.
You know, talking to the parole board, going to the parole office and meeting the people there, because a lot of times they're so afraid that they're going to violate their parole. Hey, I just spent 30 years in prison. Voting is the last thing I'm worried about doing.
And it should be one of the first, right. And that's what we have to try to get across.
Right. And so we want them to know this is a right that you have once you've completed your sentence.
That's right.
And we want to let you know, give you the tools and empower you to do so. So that's one of the things I agree with Kyle, is that we go in, we take the list and we see what we can do to implement those processes.
Right.
So now we're doing what you've asked us to do.
Yes.
Now what?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, I heard this on the radio, and Dwayne, you may have heard this too. And this was just maybe 2 days ago that now, and you all can correct me if I'm wrong, but people who are incarcerated, who are in city and county jails who are awaiting trial. A lot of people don't realize that if they have not been convicted of a crime, they have the right to vote.
Absolutely.
They have. So if they're sitting waiting for a trial date, they can vote.
Right. Absolutely.
And it's just going to be about how do we make it where they are able to, they have the ability to.
Right.
Many people don't necessarily want to see that vote.
Absolutely.
Being given to people, but it's their right. Absolutely. It is their right. What are we going to be able to do to make sure that these people who are presumed innocent until proven guilty can exercise that right?
Right. Well, you have a lot of people in jails that are convicted of, say, Class A, Class B misdemeanors,
right,
and maybe serving 6 months to a year. And so the first thing that we have to do is we have to have sheriffs and political parties that see the validity and necessity of voter registration drives in incarceration institutions. And so whether it be a county, a state jail or something like that, but so you have to have this voter registration, and then you have to have the ability to have elections officers who are willing to bring the voting machines to the jail, or you have to give these guys a furlough to go vote, which probably is not going to happen. But we're talking about elections where you're talking about 1% and 2% and 3% is the margin of victory.
Yes.
And we know who's locked up and stuff. And so if people would begin to understand just how big the Lutz Sterrett jail is down in Dallas County, or I'm not sure what the one in here in Harris County is called, but when you start seeing how massive these institutions are and how many people are being held on because they haven't been able to post bond, but they've never been convicted.
Right.
Or maybe they've been convicted of a felony, but they completed that felony. And now they're waiting on a felony charge, but they're waiting on a felony charge. They can still vote, and so it's a lot. We're talking about hundreds, if not thousands, but who has the political will to go in and say, I'm going to campaign in the jail. I'm going to go in and see if I can do a voter registration drive in the jail.
The thing about it is, it's a new day.
That's right.
And, it's all about people being able to assume the rights that they have as Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, some people are sitting there who may be there because of outstanding traffic warrants or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, they should have paid their tickets, but they didn't pay their ticket. Should they not have the right to vote? That is something that I'm just going to throw out there, because that's something I never thought about before until I heard it on the radio day before yesterday. Never even crossed my mind. And who speaks for these people?
Yeah, absolutely. No one speaks for them.
Well, we put a lot of ideas in people's heads today. I don't know if I wasn't necessarily trying to sway anybody in one way or the other, right. But as citizens, there are many things we take for granted that we really shouldn't take for granted. Voting is really one of them. I want to thank all three of my guests, Kyle, Lakedra, Dwayne. Thank you so much for coming in today and sharing your perspectives, because each one of your perspectives is very, very unique. And again, if you know someone who has been affected in one of the ways that we've talked about today, or who can give their own perspective, please make sure that you reach out to us at Crystal Dillard for Texas, Crystal Dillard, the numeral 4, Texas.com. And tell us a little bit about that. We have a way that you can make contact with the contact form. What I can do is I have somebody just trying to tell me something over in the stands, and I can't pay attention to them right now. But what I can do is ask you to please do not forget to go to my Facebook page and like my Facebook page. Please contact me. Before we go, I do want you guys to just Lakedra, you've told us a little bit about your nonprofit, Kyle, but you haven't actually told us much about your business. Can you tell us a little bit more about your business, so that we can internalize what your insight is and why your position is what it is?
I focus and specialize in helping people restore and maintain excellent credit.
Awesome.
We are moving to a cashless society
very
quickly, and credit is king. Just my opinion, cash is trash, because you overpay for everything if you're not using someone else's money.
Right.
And unfortunately, our community is underserved in the credit industry.
Right.
And we wind up overpaying for the vast majority of our goods. And just to cap that off, it's become a badge of honor, but it's really a badge of shame.
Right. And we'll have to dive a little bit deeper into that on one of our other shows, because credit and having good credit and being able to move forward in society and achieve things and gain things the way that we want to, credit is essential. But thanks so much, Dwayne. Thank you guys for coming in. And again, from the schoolhouse to the state house, stay with me, guys. We're going to get there, and I'll see you next week.